we're talking about the career of Titian, and we'll be discussing more about that in class, the early career of Titian. In 1518, Titian receives a commission from the Duke of Ferrara, Duke Alfonso de Este of Ferrara, and he begins to complete works for this commission while living in Venice. He eventually makes a trip to Ferrara to install the works, but again, he is simply commissioned by this Duke nearby. Just so you have a sense of what we're talking about geographically, Venice is highlighted here in yellow, Ferrara in blue. Ferrara is literally just outside of the Venetian mainland, the terra firma, or the Veneto region. So it's really just next door, but it's under separate leadership, under the leadership of Duke Alfonso d'Este of Ferrara. And the commission that Titian receives, which includes 3 pictures, one of which is on your left, is for the Duke's private study, little library, a place to read, a quiet place to get away from it all, that was called the Camerino d'Alabastro, the little alabaster room. And this private study was in a wing of the castle, which you see the outside of here, that connected the castle to one of its towers. And this is where he had his private study. So Titian is going to decorate this with various paintings. And there are other paintings inside the Camerino as well. Now, we've had a chance to talk about this in the past in that Bellini's great work from the National Gallery, The Feast of the Gods, was done for Alfonso d'Este, and was the first work commissioned for the Camerino d'Alabastro. Remember that Alfonso d'Este had commissioned works from numerous artists around 1510 or so, and Bellini was the only one to have completed any of these. And in 1514 he's done, which means, of course, that when Este turned to Titian, it's only a few years after Bellini has passed away. It's only a few years after the Feast of the Gods has been delivered. So it's no great lapse in time. However, Titian reworked it significantly later, 15 years later, because that's how long it took Titian to complete the 3 great works that would be seen alongside this one. Now, originally, the worship of Venus, the first of Titian's works for the sequence, was on the opposite side of Bellini's, we think. So we got to shift over here. Right, this is the way they would have originally appeared, and you can see that what Titian has done is to continue the grove of trees that Bellini originally painted, that originally went behind the entire scene, now continues and ends in the image of the worship of Venus. The subject matter that Titian chooses is equally erotic, as Bellini's was, equally ensconced in classical antiquity, and derived from the great authors of ancient Rome. It shows a ritual that took place every year in honor of Venus that was held on April the 1st. Women would come and make offerings to Venus in hopes that these offerings would remove their blemishes. And so we see here a statue of Venus on the right, and at her feet, those little things that are behind the woman's head, at her feet, right in here. Those are the offerings that they have made to Venus. You'll notice the low-cut blouse of the woman in blue suggesting the erotic nature of the scene. The woman in red is holding up a mirror so that she can see the different offerings that have been made there, but also I think she's holding the mirror for herself and her friend to see if their blemishes have miraculously disappeared. That, however, is just the side of the entire image. We're surrounded by Cupid right at their feet, and all of his friends, these little putti or erotes, is what they're called, E-R-O-T-E-S, Cupid's little putti helpers that are there to help him get all of us hot under the collar, all of us in love. They have hung their quivers in trees and have begun to gather apples. This is certainly meant to suggest that their job of making people attracted is over, and now it's time to reap the benefits of that erotic charge that they've given. So this again continues Bellini's eroticism. There's apples that are being gathered and being munched on, but you'll notice that they're munching on each other as well. Because, again, what does Cupid do but to arouse erotic feelings in people, and that's exactly what we see here. Right there's another figure coming down from the trees. And you can also see the other putti in the background dancing here, again, inspired by this erotic charge they've been given or have given themselves. And one of my favorite little details is the Puto trying to ride the rabbit, ride the bunny here, which certainly is full of sort of humorous, lighthearted, erotic detail. The second painting in the series that Titian painted was the Bacchus and Ariadne that's in your textbook. Again, this is going to continue this interest in eroticism from classical antiquity, from ancient Roman literature, and it tells the story of Ariadne. We see her on the far left of the panel. She's the one that helped Theseus defeat the Minotaur on the island of Crete by giving him the ball of string that he used to escape from the labyrinth, and he took her back with him to Athens, but only got about halfway home before he did hear from her little sister, and dropped her on the island of Naxos in the XOS. Left her for dead. She washed up on shore, where she's greeted by the king of the island, who just happens to be Bacchus. So I guess she got the better part of the deal. She wound up living the rest of her life on a Greek island, ruled by the god of wine. That's Bacchus there. He's on a chariot that's drawn by leopards. Normally it's lions. Titian has made a change here. And Bacchus is leaping from his chariot to rescue Ariadne, to bring her back from the sea, if you will, and welcome her into his group. Directly over her head, you see his constellation. This is, in fact, a recognizable constellation. It's the Corona Borealis, also known as the Northern Crown, which goes back to the legend that Bacchus, the god of wine, will eventually crown her with stars. And so we see them as a crown of stars directly over her head. Bacchus is, as normal, always accompanied by a group of satyrs. Here we have a cute little satyr boy with a spaniel barking at him. It's been suggested that maybe the spaniel was a pet of Alfonso d'Este, but certainly there is reacting to our woodland nymphs as they come forward with Bacchus. In the background, even though this is meant to be a Greek island, we see signs of sort of Venetian civilization, as well as more satyrs romping around in the forest directly behind the knee of Bacchus. Off to the right, more satyrs still. We know they are from the fur on their legs or the horns on their heads. The one figure that's wrapped in snakes is often confused with Laocoon, the figure from Greek myth who is devoured by sea serpents. But in this case, we go back to the original text for this that Titian knew, and that I'm sure Alfonso d'Este helped suggest, which suggests that he's simply wrapping himself in serpents to protect himself, and that he's indeed just another of these satyrs who accompany Bacchus in his ongoing, never-ending party. This includes not only wine, but also food. There in the background, you see Silenus on a donkey. We've seen him before a couple times over. Remember, the donkey and Silenus appear in Bellini's work, but we also saw him in Mantegna's print of the Bacchanal with Silenus, where the fat, drunken figure accompanies Bacchus, and that's the case here. But you'll notice that they're bringing other things for our party, other supplies. So the figure in the back has something on his shoulders, and the figure in the foreground has this large leg of goat, it appears. in his hands, food to go along with all of the wine that we're going to drink with Ariadne. The little Puto boy in the foreground, little sailor boy in the foreground, is dragging the head of the goat, or maybe it's a deer, or maybe it's a lamb. It's hard to say. But in any event, this is the slaughtered animal that will be part of our feast, and he gets to drag that little gory detail along with it. And again, I think it's intended to be slightly cute in its way. Finally, there's a jug just beneath the feet of Ariadne, and it's actually got Titian's signature on it, titianus, and it's been suggested that, just like the Cocker Spaniel may have been one of Alfonso d'Este's dogs, this jug might be, in fact, something from his collection. The last of the three works that Titian did for Alfonso d'Este's alabaster study was the Bacchanal of the Andrians, and it was meant to go next to the Bacchus and Ariadne that you see here in the arrangement that we seem to have at this point. So this is the very last of his works. A continuous landscape almost between the two, but this is very much a different island, according to legend. This is the island of Andros, thus the Bacchanal of the Andrians. And this was an island that was very much favored by Bacchus, where he, to show his good favor on the island, allowed the rivers to flow with wine. And so that's the central theme here, is that the rivers are flowing with wine, and the party that Bacchus inspires spreads to all of these different islands under his leadership. So we see a figure in the foreground drawing wine directly from the spring. To his left, more figures are drinking it and carrying it off. Another figure behind him is pouring that wine into the saucer held by these two women directly behind him, and silhouetted against the sky is a great claret jug full of red wine to show the theme of this picture. You'll notice that even in the background behind them, there's another shepherd figure there who's busy with drink. There's a huge keg of wine between his knees, and another figure leaning on the landscape there with a glass jug, the dog wanting a bit of wine himself. On the far right, in the landscape, the figure drank himself stupid and is picking flowers, but really just sort of fallen asleep in the garden from having far too much. Amid all of this, it seems as if there's an underscore of music and dance as part of the theme. In fact, we saw putti dancing in the worship of Venus. Here, adult figures dance around each other. The two figures on the right sort of set the theme, and it makes you realize that the figures next to them, these figures here, are also in the midst of a wine-induced dance. At the same time, there's eroticism. With that dance comes more. First, the figures in the foreground are providing music for the dance. They look very much like figures from the three ages of man. Bodices cut low to be tempting, holding on to these pipes. We can actually read the music. It's been suggested that it might well come from one of Alfonso d'Este's court musicians. But if we back away a bit, we realize that music is akin to lovemaking, and the figure behind her, who could use a bit of clothing and full of drink, is taking the opportunity to grab her by the waist and ankle and pull her closer to him. She doesn't seem to mind at all. And again, that erotic theme is certainly driven home by the naked figure of Ariadne in the lower right corner. At least that's how she's often identified. Like the figure in the landscape in the background, she's had so much to drink that she's fallen dead away. And in fact, she doesn't even seem to notice that the little boy behind her is about to pee on her ankles, or at least in the water nearby. And again, this is meant to be slightly funny, right? That stream that he's peeing in is the river of wine that the other people are drawing the wine out of in the first place. So charming details that add to the sort of humorous eroticism of the entire sequence. Now, the Ariadne figure at the right is one of a number of places where Titian actually orchestrates his work with Bellini's. You can see that her pose and her placement is very similar to the woodland nymph Lotus in Bellini's work, in the lower right corner there. So there, too, we see the exact same sort of idea. Also, this is on completing the bacchanal of the Andrians. This is when he decided to rework the background of Bellini's work to make them fit. So again, we got to move these side to side, and you can see now that the background that Titian added on the left-hand side of Bellini's work make it so that we have a continuous landscape that reads from the bacchanal of the Andrians right into the Feast of the Gods, so that they fit together as a suite. Again, there are a number of other ways in which these pieces fit together one to the next. One that I noticed when I was putting this together was that there is in the front of each one of them overturned goblets, and they seem to almost face each other in the foreground of each place, almost put in the same place by each artist. So again, Titian is very sensitive to the source material and is making sure that his work fits with that. So how do these works then all fit together? It seems as if this is the most likely scenario. We don't have any descriptions of them side by side, but if we look at the way in which the foliage in the background works, and also the order in which they were painted, this seems to be the most likely sequencing if they were all on one wall. That said, there's nothing against the idea that the two on the outside might have been facing each other, and they might have looped around a corner, or maybe even two. Finally, as a bit of a footnote, there were other works of art in the Camerino d'Alabastro of Duke Alfonso d'Este of Ferrara, and one of these is in the National Gallery as well. Dosso Dossi, on the right, was the court painter to Duke Alfonso. He was the one responsible for the portrait we saw at the beginning of this online lecture, and had become the court painter to the Duke of Ferrara and spent his entire career working in Ferrara. But as you can see, his work is very much influenced by Venetian pictures, and that certainly is what Dossi likes, otherwise he wouldn't have gone after Bellini and Titian in the first place. That's not what Dossi, but Alfonso d'Este likes. So here we have part of a suite of 10 pictures. Only 3 of them survive. But originally there were 10 pictures showing figures from the Aeneid by Virgil, the great epic poem that recounts the story of Aeneas, who had survived the Trojan War and went on to be the first citizen of Rome. Here we see him waiting to depart Asia Minor, or at least, Libya, North Africa, on his way, making his way to Rome, and having a boat either repaired or built as part of the travel. We have a very Venetian-looking landscape, cityscape in the background, again, separated from our perfected world in the foreground, with the shimmering light of dusk or dawn on it. There is Aeneas and Achates waiting for their boat to be built, and again from Virgil's epic poem. And there we see the boat under construction as they're making their way finally to Rome. So this too would have decorated the Camerino d'Alabastro of Alfonso d'Este.